Hello and welcome to HSTA 342H, African American History to 1865. My name is Pat O'Connor. I'm going to be the instructor for this course. I'm a historian who specializes in the 19th century United States, the 1800s. And to a significant extent, my research focuses on the period of emancipation, right? This was long, messy, complicated time when enslaved people made themselves free, right? This is generally located around the Civil War, right at the end of our course. But really the period of emancipation is much longer than that and extends back almost as long as the history of slavery, right? As long as people were freeing themselves, there was emancipation, freeing themselves by running away, etc. But my work tends to focus on that period around the Civil War, the great collapse of slavery in the United States. And we're going to end this class by exploring how that happened. But before that, we're going to consider how slavery took shape in the first place, how it changed over time, and how ideas about race and class that are very central to the African American experience developed within the slave system, developed alongside the slave system, developed in order to support or justify slavery in North America. The central argument for this course, and before I continue, I want to share my slide here. And let's see, play from current slide. Okay, so the central argument for this course is that African American history is simply American history, right? In other words, it's not a sidebar to American history. It's not a footnote to some bigger story of American history. In fact, you can't begin to understand colonial North America, right? Those colonies that eventually became the United States after the American Revolution. You can't at all understand the early United States. You certainly can't understand the Civil War era unless you place African Americans' experiences right at the center of that story. The construction of these civilizations was largely dependent on the labor of enslaved African American people. And in the process of their enslavement, African Americans created a distinct culture, a culture that had not existed before in world history, and that it is continuing to be central to the American experience in the 21st century, right? African Americans' experiences, ideas, their contributions to American history extend back from the time of slavery, obviously, to the present. So I think this is a vital time in our country's history to consider these experiences, to consider this history. And this course is going to be a really good opportunity for you to deepen your knowledge of some of the most important problems in early American history, things such as slavery and race and class. And I've also reserved some time for us at the end of the class to consider how these issues connect these distant periods to contemporary times, right? In other words, what legacies the history of slavery might have in our culture today, and how we might begin to address some of those legacies. And the course is also intended to help you sharpen your historical skills. If you're a history major, of course, this is really valuable, right? Historians have particular skill sets, things like their critical reading abilities, their ability to construct arguments based on evidence, etc., that we're going to practice in this class. If you're not a history major, I really am convinced these skills are still very valuable for you, and that they're going to help you in whatever endeavor you're engaged in, as is the content that we're going to be discussing here. So I'm very happy to have you, no matter what academic background you're coming from, no matter what your previous educational experiences have been like. I expect some of you will have quite a bit of background knowledge in our topic, and that's great. You'll bring it to our discussions, and that'll be informative for everyone. I also am completely fine with some of you coming to this class with very little background knowledge about the history of African Americans before 1865, right? In other words, the history of slavery and emancipation. Um, and if that is the case, you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to have some really vital knowledge to carry with you at the end of this course. One thing to know is that African American history to 1865 is a huge, huge topic, right? At the University of Montana, like most universities, we divide the study of African American history, at least in a sort of introductory sense, as to 1865 and since 1865. Well, to 1865 is several centuries long, right? It at the shortest possible time span, it dates from 1619, with the introduction of enslaved Africans to Virginia, up to the end of the Civil War. It's more than 200 years. It's an extremely long period of time, longer, in fact, than the United States has actually existed. And then since 1865 is a much shorter period of time. This class is actually going to adopt an even longer time span, just slightly. We're going to go back to the 15th century, as you'll see in this week's lecture. That's the 1400s, just to get some context for where the transatlantic slave trade came from, why Europeans were engaging in this practice at all, and to make sense of the origins of this bigger story that we're going to be learning about. This is also a huge topic, not only because of its long time span, but because we're going to be studying an amazingly diverse geographical region. Slavery and the broader African American experience took different forms in different places. Of course, this is true of places like, comparing places like Brazil to Jamaica to South Carolina, right? But even if we just zoom in on North America, slavery looks really different depending on where it's taking place, right? And as you'll see, we're going to talk about African American slavery in the North, in places like New England or New York. We're going to talk about the Chesapeake region, right around Maryland and Virginia. And then we're going to talk as well about the Low Country of South Carolina and Georgia. And then as the course moves on, we'll see that American slavery migrated west, particularly after the American Revolution, into the lower Mississippi Valley and even as far west as Texas. And slavery looks different in all of these places. It looks different because there are different social and economic and historical circumstances shaping it. None of this is to say there aren't continuities, right? There are continuities between the enslavement of Africans in, say, 1660 in Maryland and the enslavement of African Americans in, say, 1860 in Louisiana. But there are vast differences as well. And so we're going to try to balance our sense of continuity and change, which is one of the real challenges that historians always have to face. So you're going to learn a lot of content in this class. In addition to that, I'm also interested in helping you develop some of the core skills that historians practice, as I mentioned a moment ago. I've designed assignments such as the Freedom on the Move analysis papers, which you can read about in your syllabus. These encourage you to practice reading and thinking like a historian, and I'm going to go into greater detail about this in the week ahead. But one of the most important things we're going to do to this end is we're going to read a lot of stuff, right? We're going to read a lot of, in particular, primary sources. These are sources created by historical figures. They include the letters, the memoirs, the legal papers of numerous enslaved people. And reading a primary source is not like reading I don't know if people still read newspapers, but let's say it's not like reading the news. It's not like reading a novel. It's not like reading a textbook, right? It requires a particular set of skills. And as you work on your course expectations assignment over the next couple of days, you're going to read a brief piece which lays out some of the approaches that you should adopt when you read a primary source. And then we're just going to practice this a lot. And I'm going to give you lots of feedback about how you might read in some new and sharper ways so that you can begin to try to understand the world of the figures who created our primary sources, right? And that's really the historian's number one task, to understand the past, right? To understand a place that we can never truly inhabit. And to do that by reading little scraps that are left to us. Um, and this is especially challenging, and this is something we're going to talk quite a bit about in this course. It's especially challenging when your subject is a marginalized group of people like African Americans who, by and large, did not read and write because they were legally barred from doing so, right? In many cases, it was illegal to teach an enslaved person to read or write because that would empower them and give them more agency by which they could contest their enslavement. So how do you access the world of people who left relatively little written record of their existence? Okay, this is going to be a problem that we discuss throughout the class. As we do all of these things, as we learn this content, as we begin developing skills, one of the things we're going to do a lot of is work with one another. Okay, so we're going to spend a lot of time discussing what we've learned with our peers. I want you to stay focused on the history as much as possible, right? Where, as I said, this is a big topic, it's a complex topic. It's important to sort of take it on its own terms. But it's also really valuable to consider contemporary significance. And this is something that you can do in the discussion forums on Moodle. It's also something that you can do in your weekly Zoom meetings every Friday. I hope all of those discussions are going to stay grounded in the readings or in the lectures, right? It's always important to situate your claims in evidence, and the evidence that we all share in this course is probably the most appropriate. But it's also completely legitimate to connect what you've read to what's been happening in our society over the past couple of months, right? To connect issues that are significant in African American history before 1865 to issues that are significant in African American history in 2020, right? Things like police violence, economic inequality, etc. So I'm in short, I'm really excited to learn how what we're learning in this class is affecting how you think about some of those issues. Just a couple keys to success, things to keep in mind as you work your way through the class. I'm sure some of you have taken a short semester course like this before, and I'm sure many of you have not. I think it's extremely important in a 6-week semester to be aware of deadlines and to meet deadlines as much as possible. I recognize everyone's life is pretty chaotic right now. Many of you are working with children or other family in your home. Many of you are balancing this course with jobs, and I really appreciate you attempting to do this. I think it's going to be hard and challenging, but I'm confident that you all can do it. At the same time, because this is only a 6-week course, it does need to be a priority in your life. It's not going to work if this is something that you're doing on the side while you focus on other stuff. So move it to the front burner, bite the bullet, as they say, and in 6 weeks, you will have a great grade and you will have learned a lot of new things and the course will be over. But it's going to be a challenge. This is an intense way to take a college course. I'm guessing you should plan for about 4 hours a day. I think that would probably be safe. Of course, that depends on your learning style, right? Our readings are quite challenging, especially early on. Um, they're all obviously in English, but English in the 17th century is a very different language than English in the 21st century. So it's going to take you some time to adjust to the readings. You have to give yourself that time. If you don't do that early on, you might fall behind. And if you fall behind, it's going to be really hard to catch up because the course is so short and so intense. So just to reiterate, be prepared to commit yourself fully for the next 6 weeks. Give yourself time to do the readings, give yourself time to do all of the assignments, and you'll be successful. One other point I want to emphasize is this course is not designed for passive learning. As you can tell, if you look at the syllabus, you'll see that for the most part, your questions are going to be what guide our discussion. Much of this course takes place in the discussion forums or in these small Zoom chats that you're going to have on Fridays. So the course is going to be made more interesting based on your level of engagement. Students who focus on the readings, who consider the significance of the readings, who actively engage in discussion, they're going to get a lot more from this class than passive counterparts. In other words, the course lives or dies based on your engagement with it. So do your best to be an active participant, okay? I have a couple of ground rules. These are in the syllabus, but I just want to reiterate them right now. Be sensitive to the perspective of others. We're talking about some of the darkest material in human history. And we're also talking about issues that are sensitive. They're sensitive because they still matter in the world we live in today. Right? We're talking, of course, in everything that we discuss in this class, we're talking about race. We're talking about racism. We're also going to talk about things like gender and sexuality. These are sensitive topics. Be aware of that. Think carefully about the words that you use in your posts. Choose your words carefully, in other words. I think it's really valuable to stick to the topic. That's a way to be sensitive, right? I think digressing, going off topic, getting yourself stuck on issues that aren't directly related to our readings can be a way that you might offend folks. So try not to do that, right? Stay focused on the topic, stay focused on learning about this material. Base your comments for the most part on assigned readings. When you say things, make sure you're going to be able to defend them with evidence from the course. Engage your classmates in discussion, right? Don't be afraid to ask them questions. When they ask you a question, respond to it. Encourage others to respond to it. And then lastly, and obviously it says this on the syllabus, debate and humor happen. They're part of any natural conversation. They're welcome here, but the humor can never be at one another's expense, and it certainly can't be at the expense of the people that we're reading about. Last couple of things before we get going, a couple of administrative tasks. I've sent you a number of emails about this, but just make sure you get a copy of the course book, Major Problems in African American History by Barbara Krauthammer and Chad Williams. I have links to where you can get the book in the email I sent. You can also get it from the UM bookstore. Take some time to review the Moodle page. As you'll see, it's organized by Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday to Friday. So just pay attention to that. Pay your registration bill by Friday, July 10th. If you don't, you will get dropped from the course and you're going to miss a number of days. And like I said earlier, if you miss any time in this class, it's going to be really hard to recover. So make sure you get that registration bill paid ASAP. And then finally, read the syllabus carefully, save a copy, have it handy at all times, and make note of all of the deadlines to come. Okay, as always, you can ask me any questions, and I'm looking forward to getting started. Thanks, everybody.